Angels Care Home Health, serving Hayes and the surrounding areas, is a Medicare-certified home health agency providing quality skilled nursing and restorative therapy services to patients in their homes.
I would recommend Angel Care to anybody. They have really helped me regain my strength.
Angels Care is there to help 24 hours a day, and all services are covered 100% by Medicare for patients who are eligible. Angels Care Home Health. We serve patients.
I couldn't have survived this without Angels Care.
Eagle Community Television presents Community Connection with your host, Mike Cooper.
Hello and welcome again to Community Connection from Eagle Community Television. Thanks for watching, and thanks to our producer, Jeff Durall. We're in the offices of Dr. Grady Dixon, chair of the Department of Geosciences at Fort Hays State University, second floor of Tamanic Hall, by the way. And we're talking with Dr. Dixon about a new project that's coming to Fort Hays State and the Department of Geosciences. First, if you would, Dr. Dixon, fill us in a little bit on your background and your work in geosciences. How'd that come about?
Well, this is my first year at Fort Hays State. I've been in geosciences since my first month as a college student back in the 90s. My bachelor's degree was in meteorology at Mississippi State University. Went on and got graduate degrees in geography and have worked with geologists, environmental scientists, and all sorts for years. And so that's kind of a good segue into what geosciences really involves, which is, at the risk of sounding selfish, it involves a little bit of everything.
Hey, that's what the director does.
That's right.
He promotes.
So if it's anything on the planet, if it has a spatial component, if it involves resources of the earth, we like to think that we can contribute something. But for the most part, more practically in our department, we are geologists and we are geographers. And again, those are very broad. They incorporate technology, they incorporate fossils at Sternberg, they incorporate petroleum and lots of things in between.
Meteorology is something that, of course, obviously affects us all, but was there a person or a situation or something that really drove you to that or led you to that area?
You know, I'm not sure. A lot of weather people have a culminating moment, usually in their childhood. Whether it is real or reimagined years later, I'm not sure. I don't know that I have one of those, but I do know that until I was around 10 years old, I grew up in a mobile home in the Deep South. And so one of the scariest things and most fascinating things in my life was severe weather. And you don't hide inside a mobile home during severe weather. You go outside because a mobile home, even in the early 80s, we knew that was not a safe place. And so I was always outside with my family, listening for the sound of a train, which as a young child, I thought maybe the tornado had a whistle. And that caused confusion early on, and maybe that's why I started exploring it.
But that led you then into the education field then?
It did. So I actually didn't know that you could study meteorology unless you wanted to be on television. Maybe owe that debt of gratitude to my high school counselor, because that's what she told me. But I went to school for engineering and luckily chose a school that had a meteorology program, took an elective the first semester, first college class I ever stepped foot into, and I was hooked right away. I gave up engineering scholarships to go study the weather.
Well, coming up, the first storm chasing class at Fort Hays State University. Talk about that, Dr. Dixon.
Well, so typically, and it's not always the case, but typically if you're interested in weather, you're interested in experiencing it and seeing it. And, you know, like any other sort of lab practicum in any other discipline, you can learn in the class for years and years and years, but until you see the theory actually being applied in real time, it typically doesn't click. And so that's how I got into it. I went on a field trip as a college sophomore and left Mississippi with my group of students and professor, and we drove around the Great Plains for 2 weeks. Really didn't see much that year as far as really impressive tornado formation or storm structure, but it didn't take much to impress me. Just the fact that we could see anything as opposed to being in the trees in the Deep South was enough to get me hooked. And I loved traveling. Again, I'm a geographer as well, like seeing the world. So I've done it every year since then. And for the past 6 years or so, I've been leading it as a class through Mississippi State, which was my previous university. I also partner up with some folks at Western Kentucky University. They have a meteorology program, and I help them lead their trip each summer. And so now at Fort Hays, we don't have a meteorology program. We have some students that are interested in weather. And again, geosciences is broad. People are interested in the environment in general. And so I thought, I still want to do it. And I think there's a niche. There's no other school anywhere in the state of Kansas or really the surrounding states that do this. So why not?
And you're opening up to students for participation then.
That's right. This is the first year. We've had pretty good interest. We currently have a waiting list for students that are hoping that some others maybe don't actually get to make it, don't commit. But one of the things is we have to limit the size of the trip. You know, we don't want a caravan driving through traffic of big cities, disrupting small towns, being caught in dangerous situations. So I limit it to one van so that I know that I'm navigating for every student on the trip at all times. And then we have a driver and then 8 students. And so because of that, we have to limit the enrollment each year.
So there's already a waiting list then?
There is. For this year, there's a waiting list of 4 people, and it includes Fort Hays students, at least 1 from K-State, 1 from KU, and at least 2 from Salisbury University in Maryland.
So you've really opened this up to a wide area of experience then for college students.
We have, and that's probably a product of it being brand new. Eventually, I would envision that this becomes something that students at Fort Hays want to do, and we give priority to Fort Hays folks. But right now, it's as much of a PR tool as it is an educational tool, and letting people know where Fort Hays is, what kind of programs we offer.
What about gender makeup? How's that playing out?
Well, to some extent, it's not considered. However, if it's close, if we end up with one last spot to fill, and the question is who do we choose, then we might try to make it an even split, male and female, just for hotel lodging accommodations, things like that. But for the most part, the only priorities we've given consideration to were those that committed early, those that perhaps had some weather background or were going to go into a career field that may be related to weather. But everything's flexible.
So women college students are interested as well then?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that's a big issue that we have in sciences is that it seems that female students tend to be exceptional in science, certainly better than the male counterparts, up until a point that roughly seems to be somewhere around puberty, and then it tails off dramatically. And so we struggle in the university's setting to recruit female students into the sciences. And in my experience, I've had tons of wonderful graduate students and undergraduate females that have participated in this trip. A lot of my former graduate students are now professors around the country. And so I like to think that I have a pretty good track record of luring them in.
Well, in your expertise and experience then, what is the drop-off point? What causes that? And we hear it time and again where female students just back away from the sciences.
Yeah, that is not my area of expertise. I wish I knew. I like to think that when female students make it to us at the university setting, we do everything we can to make them feel welcome and encourage them. And I think a lot of us are good at that. But there is something else going on way before they get to the university setting most of the time, I think.
What about cost to participate in the trip?
That's a great question. It is not your normal course. It's going to cost a lot extra simply because we have to leave the campus. People in Hays are familiar with severe weather, but if you want to see it, you have to go out and find it typically. And that means driving anywhere from South Texas to northern North Dakota and all points in between. And so the students pay tuition for 3 hours, which is very inexpensive at Fort Hays State. And then there's a set of course fees that are essentially another $1,000 for a 10-day course. And that's renting the van, it's paying for fuel, and it's paying for the lodging. And years ago, we used to camp and we stayed at some pretty nasty roach motels. When we turned this into a course for students, safety became utmost of importance. And believe it or not, I'm less concerned about injury from tornadoes than I am from harassment at hotels. So we stay at pretty nice hotels, mainstream areas, and that's one reason the expense is a little higher.
But there's also college credit involved as well, right?
There is, and that's a big thing I think for especially the students that are going into meteorology. There's a real course, and it is a virtual college course, even though we'll be face-to-face for much of it. And so it's virtual college because before we leave Hays to go on the field component, which is 10 days, we have a full week of lectures, videos, assignments, quizzes, leading up, getting the students prepared. And then it has to culminate in something as well. We have a bit of a final exam, and I don't know what that's going to look like yet because it's dependent upon what we get the opportunity to observe in the field. And so some years it could be all about what prevents storms from happening. That hasn't happened in many, many years. But we are in a period right now with a bit of a reduced frequency in tornadoes. So it could be that we're learning more about severe thunderstorms that don't produce tornadoes. Or it could be about the geographical features around the country that help produce tornadoes. And so depending on what the setup gives us, we will cater the end of the class and the final exam to those material.
You know, that's a nice learning experience where you've combined the virtual college instruction with the actual lab experience, if you will, then.
I think so. I mean, and it shows that, sometimes professors or the general public or whomever, sometimes they have negative opinions about distance learning or online education. I suppose some of those fears are valid, but most of them are just that. They're fears of the unknown. And this is a case where it's become a huge asset for us, especially for students that have left after the spring semester and they're committing time and money to come back and go on this field trip. It's really not fair of me to demand that they come in here and sit in a classroom with me when they're going to be spending all day, every day with me for 10 days. So we give them the flexibility to go get a job, maybe earn a little money and support themselves on this trip while still getting material online.
Well, you mentioned that you've done this every year since, 1998, I believe.
That's right. That is.
And seen any experiences you could relate to us, up close and personal, so to speak?
I get asked this a lot. I'm afraid usually my answers are boring because my most memorable experiences are not necessarily storm related. And that's what some people fail to understand too. The best part about these trips is spending time on the road, seeing new places. You have nothing to do any day except go see weather and anything in between. And so it's the little things along the side of the road that tend to be most entertaining sometimes. Now, I'm underselling some of the storms. I've got tons and tons of photos that when I look back at them, it's just like being there again. The memories are fantastic. It's truly breathtaking. I've not had any real close calls where I feared for my safety, related to storms at least. There's been some traffic incidences and some wildlife incidents that sometimes were nerve-wracking. But yeah, we were on the Joplin tornado before it entered the city of Joplin. Very memorable, even though it wasn't that picturesque. It was memorable for bad reasons and the emotions that it created within us. Some of our most picturesque tornadoes have actually been in western Kansas. One was out near Walker just a few years ago. Saw one near Tribune, another one near southeast Colorado. That were all we were based out of the Hayes area for those days. But yeah, pretty much every state in the Great Plains, I've seen at least one memorable storm, dramatic tornado, large hail, or something like that.
Perhaps due to influences of things like the Weather Channel and such, storm chasing, storm watching, storm reporting has become quite the experience now.
It has, and so when we're talking about safety, that's one of my biggest concerns is if it is a big day and people think there's a high chance of tornadoes, they'll come in from far and wide, thousands of miles away sometimes. And typically, if you're forecasting well, you tend to end up in the same spot as others. And that's a dangerous situation. All these small towns throughout western Kansas are not designed for 150 extra people at one given moment. And so traffic jams on rural roads are a real concern, especially if there's dangerous weather nearby. And so one of my challenges over the last few years has been find the target for the best chance of severe weather, identify a second and third target with good chances of severe weather, and then determine which one is going to be the safest, not because of the weather, but because of the infrastructure and the likelihood of the hordes of chasers. So we stay away from urban areas if at all possible. We stay away from cities that have meteorology programs, which means they have lots of students that might come out for the day. And typically, they're going to be in large urban areas like Oklahoma City area, for example, big research facility and lots of students there at OU. But that's a concern, and that's something that is the one thing that makes me nervous is traffic. Just like driving down Vine or I-70, whether there are storms or not, you got to be prepared for the other person.
And some of those watchers or chasers might be inexperienced individuals who are just out for a lark.
They can be, and I think there's sometimes people that follow storms always want to think that they have more of a right than others that are out there, or they're a little more experienced or whatever. And so I'm not going to make any judgment calls on who should and shouldn't be out there. However, there are some people that will try to follow others. And it's just someone that has no experience, but they see a horde of storm chasers driving through and they latch on. If you're doing that, I would ask you to consider what is your motivation? I mean, it's probably not a safe thing. It's probably not a smart thing. You don't know who you're following. So those people I would encourage to do something else. For those reasons as well, if you're looking for us on the Great Plains this year so you can wave at us or honk at us, don't waste your time. We're going to look like any other nondescript, maybe church van or something going to a camp. We're not going to have Fort Hays plastered all over the place because we don't want people to follow us and risk their lives and potentially put us in danger too.
Safety is number one.
Absolutely.
Dr. Grady Dixon, who is the chair of the Department of Geosciences, a welcome addition to Fort Hays State University, and our community connection. Thanks for watching.
Angels Care Home Health, serving Hayes and the surrounding areas, is a Medicare-certified home health agency providing quality skilled nursing and restorative therapy services to patients in their homes.
There's not any words to describe their kindness.
Angels Care is there to help 24 hours a day, and all services are covered 100% by Medicare for patients who are eligible. Angels Care Home Health. We serve patients.
They saved my life.